David. Thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited to get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
This is great. I'm honored to be on your show. New York City guy. I teach writing for the City University of New York, and I have a few novels out. I'm very excited about my new one, which is titled Lelya Dorche and the Coney Island Cure, and it comes out, pretty soon. So it's just great to be here.
Love that. I would love if you could tell us what your books are about.
Sure. I mean, I'd love to talk first about the new one because I think it's a timely book. It takes place in March, April, May of 2020, and if you know, this was in New York City at least. This was the doomsday time. This was when COVID really just descended upon our city like a sci-fi novel. And we live in Jackson Heights, Queens, which was called the epicenter of the epicenter by the national media. It's just where, there were so many cases of COVID, and unfortunately so many tragic cases as well. And we were living in this sort of paranoid bubble, I better say mushroom, for a few months, and no one knew quite how to act and quite how to survive. And I thought, during this period, I thought to myself, you know what it was? It was one particular day. I remember here in Queens, New York, and I was coming back from shopping in I think it was March 2020, and I remember I crept cautiously back into my apartment building from the local grocery store, and as I approached the stairwell of my building, I caught the stare of a neighbor hiding behind the mailbox wall, and she had the look of terror in her eyes. She stared at my hands as if I held some, I don't know, like 7 bloody claws. I knew her well enough to know that her young daughter had a respiratory issue, and underlying condition, that is. And here I was bringing deadly germs back from the public market. And as I hurried away up the lonely stairwell, all I could think was, we could use a little magic in our world right about now. And so right there, I started composing what would become Lelya Dorche and the Coney Island Cure, which is really a magical realist COVID novel.
Love that. Did you want to talk about your other books, or did you want to focus on just this one through it?
Well, I guess I can say I have a novella out that came out right in the beginning of the pandemic, but it's not connected to the pandemic. And it's called The Lower East Side Tenement Reclamation Association. That's a long title. Lower East Side Tenement Reclamation Association. Sometimes I forget the title, but I guess I could tie them together and say, this is urban writing. It's magical realist writing. It's not what I always do. I've written quite a few published short stories, and they're not magical realists. But I think I'm just in that groove right now. I'm in that genre of magical realist fiction. But I don't know. I guess my mind is more focused today on my new book because it's more recent.
Love that. What inspired you to write your book?
Well, a few things. As I mentioned, we were just living in misery in the heart of the early pandemic. I had bad COVID right away, and it was just an awful time. My wife worked at a public hospital in the Bronx, and she had to go in every day. I know some people disappeared to their second homes, and that's great, I guess, if you can, right? But my wife had to go to work 5 days a week in a hospital during the heart of the pandemic, in a kind of a brutal period in New York City history. And I'm a writer, and I said I have to write about this, but I don't want to write a documentary about COVID. Who's going to want to read a documentary about COVID? And after all, isn't this written about every day? I mean, ad nauseum in the newspapers and online. So I don't want to do that. I'm a fiction writer. So what do I do? So I said, let's bring magic. Let's bring magic into this. Let's make it funny. It's not funny at all, but let's make it funny. And so Coney Island came in because I thought to myself, growing up, Coney Island represented a fantasy world on the Atlantic shore, right? I don't know if our listeners are familiar, but Coney Island is kind of a famous amusement park area in Brooklyn, down by the beach, which really saw its heyday perhaps 100 years ago. But it's still popular, and it still has amusement. But it was Coney Island was always famous for like this kind of fake magic, this freak show schlock at its best. It was all sort of freak show fantasy. Nothing was real. Everyone kind of understood it was fake, but that's what people wanted. They wanted to escape the horrors of what was going on in the city. You go down to the shore and you watch some kooky magic show or a circus act. And so I thought, why not have some magic happen in Coney Island? And why not, how about some real magic in Coney Island, some practical magic at a desperate moment in time that's actually useful?
Love that. When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
That's a great question. I think I was, it was funny. I was sitting in a cafe the other day, I don't know, a week or two ago in Manhattan. And I have to confess something, because, you really shouldn't listen to other people's conversations. But there was someone at the next table and she had headphones on, but she was speaking really loudly into sort of like I don't know if it was a mic she had. And she was a TV producer and she was talking about a new show on HBO that she had some connection with. And so, it was interesting. And I tried not to listen. I wanted to be polite, but, you do overhear things. And I heard her talking to someone and she said something, I can't quote her exactly, but the gist of it was, listen, this show takes place 2 years ago. We cannot ignore the fact that we were in the middle of a global pandemic. We have to put it into the script. We can no longer continue to ignore this. And I heard that. I was sitting there and I just thought, bullseye, because when I was writing the book, I was worried about my readership. I said, well, who's going to want to read about COVID? We're all freaking out about it. We all want to forget about it. But there comes a time, and I think this happens in history with other, other issues that come up. You need a little distance, right? You need to move away from the fear. And I think now that COVID, while it's still with us, it's fading. It's not as much of a national crisis. It's much less so. And so I think we're sort of like ready to give up on the amnesia and sort of face our recent history. And yeah, like the woman said, the TV producer, if you have a show that takes place in 2021 or 2022, and you don't mention anything, it's sort of like erasing history, right? So I think, my readership is folks that want to sort of explore what have we gone through? Let's come out of our shell here. What just happened? And let's explore it in a lighter way. It's funny. The book is supposed to be funny. It doesn't make fun of a global pandemic. It's a tragic thing. I would never do that. And there is tragedy in the book, but it's funny. It's magical, and I think it's a nice way. It's a nice way in. It's a nice way in to sort of revisit that difficult time period.
Love that. How long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Great. I've been writing for quite a long time, more than 24 years. I teach writing. I started out as a bad poet, and I kind of ended as a bad poet, at least in the poetry section of my life. But poetry, writing poetry is really helpful for anyone out there that wants to write in any genre. I mean, any genre, journalistically, fiction, whatever it might be. Because poetry really, it brings you down to the sort of fundamental word level. You really focus on each individual word and how it fits and the beauty and the aesthetics of it. So it was a good start, but I just wasn't really, picked the wrong instrument. And then I started writing short stories, and I think I was a whole lot better at that. I'm really into sort of character structure and plot as well. And sort of, I don't want to say teasing my reader, that's not the wrong word. I would say just sort of enticing the reader to keep, those pages turning. I think that's something you'll see in this novel. Like it's one of those novels where you're like, what happens? What's going to happen? How is this going to play out? But anyway, short stories, and I had a few published. I won a big prize with Glimmer Train not too long ago. That was really an honor. And then I started writing novels, and I had a big novel almost hit, and almost hit from a short story award. I wrote a novel out of it, and some of the big publishers were biting pretty hard. But the one thing about this game is that you really have to keep at it. And if you don't love it, it's just not worth pursuing. So, you're going to hit some, you're going to miss others. I'm just so honored. I was offered a contract with Madville Publishing out in Dallas, Texas. Great house. If anyone's looking to get published, they're really friendly and they work really well with you. Madville Publishing, just a shout out to them. So yeah, so now I'm just like, you know what? I want to write novels. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. No short stories, no bad poetry.
Love that. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
It's kind of crazy. My wife's still married to me, but yeah, I mean, I'm an academic, so for those of you out there that teach courses, you know what I'm talking about. We go on the academic calendar. The year calendar has no meaning at all. 2022 doesn't matter. It's all about September to August. That's the academic calendar. And so between September and June, it's hard, right? You're teaching writing and you get home and you have to read lots and lots of essays from college freshmen. And so by the time you're done grading and making comments, you're like, do I really want to sit another 2 hours at a computer and work on my own stuff? So it's really a struggle. But I would say the key is you have to have like that 1 day a week where you just go at it, because as most writers know, when you sit down to write, that first hour or two is just warm up. You're just trying to like escape the world of your thoughts, Oh, we need kitchen paper. You can't be thinking like that when you're writing fiction. You cannot be thinking about your mom's not feeling so well. I got to call her, So that first hour and a half, you're just trying to escape your world. So you need a really good block of time. So that's my advice to those writers. And some of you are probably more experienced writers than I am, and you already know this kind of stuff. But and then you have the summer, if you're not teaching, and it's a luxury for me to not have to teach courses in the summer. So that's when you put everything together. Like if you're writing 60, 70 pages in 9 months, you're writing another 60 to 100 in 2 months in the summer. So that's where you really jumpstart and get deep in. But I have a lot of writer friends. Everyone has a different style. I know for me, it takes about 1.5 years to put together a full novel. So it's a lot.
Love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
What do I need? That's a good question. I've never been asked that. That's a good question. What do I need in my writing space? I don't need quiet. I live in New York City. This is a crazy town. It's just hard, I don't think there is any quiet here. You could be in your apartment and it's like beep beep. So it's just chaos all the time. And I think I thrive on that. I like familiarity. I think that's what I would say. I go to this cafe. It's in my acknowledgements page. It's Cafe La Nueva, and I get my cafe con leche. It's an famous Uruguayan bakery cafe in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York. Check it out if you're in town. And they're just so nice to me. They know I'm a writer. I showed them my novel and I put them in my acknowledgements page. And so they know. And, you can just sit there and have the most delicious, Latin coffee. And it's not one of these cutthroat places where they'll kick you out after 2 hours because you're not buying more stuff. And so I need that familiarity. And I guess I also need a certain, I don't know if this is like an ego thing, but it's a certain acceptance. Like, all right, maybe I'm just making this up in my head, but sometimes I walk in and I see like this look, I get this look like, oh, here comes that writer guy. So then it kind of gives me purpose, right? Now, if I get to, here comes that writer guy, then I better do some writing, right? Because that's so loser. If here comes the writer guy and he comes in and he just sits there and he doesn't do any writing. So that kind of motivates me to do what they think I'm going to do, which is write.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
Great. Well, I mean, the drink is definitely, coffee because yes, it works. It does do the trick. I don't like to eat a lot because this is really like a silly, superficial answer, but I have this this lovely, MacBook Air, and if I eat anything like sticky or anything, this is going to get ugly really fast. So I try to keep it super clean. Cup of coffee, like piece of plain bread or bread with like some jelly. Nah, no jelly, no jelly. You get the point. Real simple. Focus on the writing.
Love that. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I like literary fiction, but nothing snobbish. I mean, some of the classics, Donna Tartt, The Goldfinch. I mean, everyone sort of like mentions that book, but there are just certain writers that they could be writing for 42 pages about like nail polish and it's interesting. I'm like, how do they do that? How can like sometimes Donna Tartt, I know in The Goldfinch, it's like an 850 page book. Don't quote me on that. It might be 750, but it's a long book. And yeah, like I'll read 19 pages about, I don't know, like how the garbage truck isn't there today or something. And if I try to do that, it wouldn't even make it through half a page and it would be boring by the third sentence. But she, like, you're just completely suspended in her world for God, you can just keep going on and on. And so there are writers like that. Jennifer Egan. Oh God, just insane. They're just such good writers. Donna Tartt, Jennifer Egan. Um, there's another guy who writes like kind of gothic, Patrick McGrath, one of the great writers of the world that isn't quite as the other two I mentioned are super heralded writers, but Patrick McGrath gets a lot of respect. But Patrick McGrath writes this like scary gothic stuff that one time I had a Patrick McGrath book in my hand. I had just gotten it from the public library in New York City. I had a connection, so I kind of got the book before it really came out. I don't even think it had the library stamps and everything on it. She just gave it to me. So I'm like reading this book, and I read the first 20, 30 pages, Patrick McGrath's classic book, Port Mongo. I think it's called Port Mongo, yeah. And I'm standing on the subway platform. This is an elevated 7 train. It's an elevated subway in Queens that goes to Manhattan. And I was so excited. I just didn't even notice the train was coming. And the train was coming, and the energy, the wind from the train coming in, the force kind of knocked the book out of my hand. This is true. I wrote an article about this. And the book fell out of my hand onto the subway platform on the elevated subway line. And of course, I couldn't go down and get it because if you go down to get the book, you might get like smashed by the next oncoming train. But I'm also thinking, I got to know what happens in this book. For me, that's the essence of why I write and why people read and why people should read. Like that feeling I had on the subway platform, right? Like waiting, like I have to, it's not about my life. I don't want to get killed here for the book. Of course not. It's not worth it. Then you never find out what happens if you get killed, right? But I just need to get that book back in my hand so I can find out what happens to these characters. And I had to go down to the subway guy and I said, listen, I dropped my book. And he's like, yeah, people drop stuff down there all the time, especially their cell phones. So like he said, just stand there and wait. And I'm not making this up. 7 or 8 minutes later, these guys come. They look like they're dressed up in like cricket clothing. They're all like in full length white cloth uniforms. They're all dressed the same way. And they're all holding these kind of zany pitchfork items. And that's what they do all day long. They go around New York City. God knows how many subway lines we have here. And they just get stuff off the rail for people that, there are enough people every day that drop stuff. So they just got me the book. Like it took them 2 seconds, with this tool they had. And they're like, be careful next time. And they ran away. That was it. Never saw these guys again. And so I got the book back in my hand, Patrick McGrath's Port Mongo. And I just said, thank God I can find out what happens to these characters,
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Well, back in time in high school and early college, you're reading like more like the classics, like Charles Dickens. Everybody reads that. Oliver Twist, um, stuff like that. And Toni Morrison, the lovely Toni Morrison. You're reading it in a class, and most people, I remember in high school, like the kids, I didn't go to a great high school, and like nobody really, it was kind of a environment. And I'm not mocking anyone, and like, these are nice kids, but they just weren't into it. You know how it is in high school. So like being into it, wanting to read a book, wanting to finish a book, listening to the teacher talk about a book was considered super nerdy, and it didn't make you very popular. And so you kind of had to like veil your love of reading in high school. And that sucked. I was reading these classics, Dickens, a little Shakespeare. And then I got to college. I went to a decent college, University of Wisconsin. Great state, great town. Sorry. Let me just clear my throat. some nice hot tea. So I went to the University of Wisconsin and I started taking some English classes, and I thought, wow, there's nobody threatening to beat me up now if I say I'm going to do the homework. And it was just a great feeling. And now we're reading like some of the great African-American writers really turned me on. James Baldwin, I mentioned Toni Morrison before, Richard Wright, and so on. So I took a course there. And, when you're carried away like that, you just say, how can I create magic like that? Or if I could do it quarter as good, I'll be satisfied. Quarter as well.
Love that. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
That's always a tough question because so many books out there, right? I was read to a lot when I was a kid. I think I remember, like, I'm not sure I'm answering the question directly, but I think for me, I remember like scenarios, like settings, more than I remember particular books, if that makes any sense. I mean, the books were great, don't get me wrong, and I will come up with one, but I guess for me it was the settings. And for this, I just give a shout out to my mom because, I still remember, people always say like, how far back can you remember? And I met someone the other day that like was telling me about something they did when they were 3, and we were all rolling our eyes. We're like, come on, really? You were 3, you remember the details? So I don't know. But for me, maybe 5, 6, it begins life, the memory that goes back maybe that far. And I just remember like the earliest memories were my mom reading me children's books, lots and lots and lots and lots. Great choices. Later on in life, I looked them up. I'm like, these are the books I read. What were they good? And they were just great books. And the second thing I remember is we lived close to the beach, and that was like the thing to do. We'd all get in the car, and then he'd drive to the beach. We'd all sit in like beach chairs and read. I mean, we talk. It's not like people see families reading and they think, oh, they don't get along. They're not talking. There's no communication going on. But it's the opposite. There's a great communication going on. We're all reading. And then at some point, my parents would ask me like, well, what's going on in your book? Or do you like your book? Or what do you like about it? And those conversations were just golden. It was just so awesome. It was a great way to communicate with my parents. It's a whole lot more interesting than be told, like being told, don't forget to finish your waffles or whatever. No, that's not fun. But being asked about the book you're reading for me was really exciting. And I guess if I had to name a book, I mean, this is kind of embarrassing, but a childhood favorite was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is more known, more famous for the movie, but the book itself was Roald Dahl. Is that how you pronounce it? I think he's Swedish. Dahl, right? He wrote that. Yeah, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Great book.
Love that. On the opposite side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, series are tough, right? I love the idea of series, but I feel like series belong to certain genres, like sci-fi, and I don't really read sci-fi. That's why there's so many YA series, because it's like big into like dystopian stuff, and that's not what I'm into. And then, of course, another series kind of thing would be like more like pop thrillers. I'm not into that, nor am I into like mystery series. So. But yeah, if certain author has a new book out, it's going to be exciting, And so, for example, I mentioned earlier, but I didn't mention this author, the great British writer Kate Atkinson. She's quite famous. She's like a rock star in England, but I think 2 of her books are movies. So I mean, she's not exactly like off the radar, But she wrote Life After Life, which is just like the most amazing book. It's like, is that the name? I really hope I got that right. I believe I did. But it's basically a book about someone, like, imagining the main character just keeps dying, but then they're alive in the next chapter. And then you just wonder how they're going to die the next time. And then they die again in some other like really creative way. But that they're not really, it's just amazing. It just keeps going on. And then you get wrapped up in This whole series of deaths that aren't really deaths. It's just brilliant. It's so brilliant. Kate Atkinson. So so like if I don't know, if I hear that Kate Atkinson has a new novel, then my ears perk up. I'm like, okay, forget about what's for dinner tonight. Let me go. I gotta take care of business. I gotta get this book right away.
Love that. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Such a good question. It is so easy to fall off the reading track. It is so easy, especially in 2023. Our attention spans are shrinking. We're all staring at our phones all the time, news feeds, other feeds, social media feeds. And it's just so easy to feel like at the end of the day, I've read enough text, I'm done. And all you've really read are like these short little, do nothings on your phone. And so it's really hard to convince yourself, like, all right, I'm going to pick up a book or I'm going to read a book online. It doesn't really matter how you read it, or even an audio book. Listen to it. Listening to a book is great as well. It's a real investment. It's a real investment. And I feel like people who read, they need someone in their circle that is enthusiastic about reading, right? So whether it's your neighbor, you're probably more likely your good friend or your sibling, but if you hear someone talking about a book and they're like going nuts about it, yeah, we are, human beings, we're kind of an envious species, right? We're like, oh yeah, that person's so excited. They seem so happy. I want some of that, And so when you hear that, you're like, well, what are you reading? What is it? And that might turn someone on back to reading. And I've heard stories of people doing it completely on their own. They're just like, you know what? This is ridiculous. I haven't read a book in like 6 years. This is out of control. And so, they ask around, they find out a title, and you just have to make time. I think that's one of the hardest parts. It takes a long time to read, and sometimes I'm embarrassed because I'm reading the same book for like almost a month. I don't like when that happens. I don't think it's the best way to read because there's too much time between chapters. But however long it takes you, I think if you get back into that first book and you have a good experience, then it builds itself back into a habit. And that's what reading should be. It should be a habit.
Love that. On the opposite side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
Well, you got to feel the magic. You got to feel the magic. Before I started my new novel, Lelya Dorche and the Coney Island Cure, I had like 2 or 3 other ideas. I mean, I think writers often don't want to talk about this because it's like the elephant in the room sometimes. But of course, it's not like we just sit down and start writing the next novel and then it becomes a novel. No, we have a lot of false starts. And so for those who are writing out there, you just got to keep going. And at a certain point, you're taking notes on a novel and something's not working, or you're not inspired by the topic enough, or you realize I can't get more than 8 pages out of this. What am I going to do? Don't think you've wasted your time. You have not wasted your time, because all these ideas are like, all this brainstorming for one novel idea, one concept might play its way, or just pave the way is better. Pave the way for this other idea that was just lurking in the background. And that's what happened to me. I mean, like I said, I was working on stuff, and then all of a sudden COVID happened. And I wanted to say just something about the hook, like when you have a really good hook for your novel, tell a few people. Don't tell them everything. Don't give away the bridge, but tell a few people close to you who you trust about your idea and say, does this sound like something that would be interesting to people? I mean, when I first started this new novel, I think I was talking to one of my writer friends, and I'm like, all right, God, let me just you got 5 minutes? And he's like, yeah, I got 5 minutes. Okay. New Yorkers rarely have that much time for anyone, right? But now 5 minutes, I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay. So I said, all right, well, look, COVID happens, right? And there's a dad, and his son has, how do you call it? Eosinophilic asthma. It's really severe condition, very bad asthma condition. He's 13. The father's freaking out because COVID's everywhere. And if his kid gets it, at that point, we thought those with underlying conditions like that, they're going to die. This isn't like just COVID, like a sore throat. You're gone. You're going to end up gone under a ventilator, and that's it. And so, what do you think? I said, what do you think about this? The dad, he's freaking out. And then he kind of meets this magical figure. She's Bulgarian. She's a natural healer. Her name is Lelya Dorche. She's a natural healer. She's kind of working underground in Coney Island at a defunct post office. And the thing is, she's not willing to. She's only treating a certain number of people. She's not willing to help this guy out until she finds out that the guy's wife is Bulgarian, and there's a connection made in the Bulgarian connection. And so they make a deal. The guy makes a deal. The woman says, if you can find your way to the northwestern coast of Bulgaria on the Danube River, and if you can retrieve 10 liters of a rare Macedonian pine sap, which is a key ingredient in my serum, then I'm going to treat your son. But this is no small feat, right? Because in the early days of the pandemic, there was a strict ban on passenger flights out of the US. You could not fly out of the US. So now you got a father whose son could die. And by the way, he gets COVID. So he has COVID. Now he has the virus. And his father's panicking. And he has to find a way to illegally get overseas to Europe, to Eastern Europe, and find this Macedonian pine sap and bring it back so that this natural healer, Lelya Dorche, will treat his son. It's just life and death. The whole novel is life and death. And so I told my friend that, and he's like, you got to write that book. And that was it. So that was it. That was what I needed to hear. It's like, you got to write that book. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write that book. And then, 16 months later, I have 204 pages. But that's what you need. You need a friend you trust. You need to put in the time, first of all. You need to be able to give up on ideas that aren't working. And you need to, listen to the wisdom around you. And if someone tells you, someone you trust says, yeah, I would read that. That sounds like a book I would read. Then write the book.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Oh, that's interesting. I think that I'm a drummer. I'm a drummer in a rock band. I think sometimes because I wear glasses and I teach writing at a college, and I'm always sort of sitting still at a computer. It just doesn't really, like, the image of a rock and roll drummer bouncing around and smashing cymbals and all that and playing live concerts. It just doesn't necessarily jive with their image. But that's my other love, music. And I've been lucky because I got into a band. We're called the Edukators, with a K, Eduk, the Educators. And it was just great. My daughter was like 17, and she's a really, really good singer, really good singer. And she was just like kidding around with these guys I was playing with. And we formed a band, and she was the lead singer with a bunch of older guys. I mean, much older than her. And yeah, it was great. We got we made a couple albums. We got an album deal. We made a few EPs, and we started playing around New York City and a couple festivals, and got on French radio. And we're not that, listen, we're not the Beatles here, but we're not famous. But it's just been a lot of fun. And I think that it's funny because I put that on my website. That's like, my website's all about my writing, and then I'm like, all right, what, let's throw some music on there, because it is a different world, right? The music world. So yeah.
Love that. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
Not really. I mean, I just wanted to say that, this has been really a nice interview. I feel like sometimes interviewers, I don't know, they get like too personal or too detailed in their questions. And so it's like awkward, but to answer, because it's sometimes hard to come up with the right answer to certain questions. But I like your questions are just like wonderfully like holistic. They're kind of open-ended. And they allow the interviewed interviewed person to kind of explore their feelings. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the best place is to go to my website for the book. I have a website kind of just for the book. It has my other stuff too. Um, and I will be setting up some like handles, social media handles. I'm a little bit behind on that, but David Rothman, it's just like it sounds, David Rothman, Rothman, ConeyIslandCure.com. David Rothman, ConeyIslandCure.com is like a good sort of meeting space. Um, and it has my contact information on there. And it's funny, I just like set up the site. I've already gotten some cool feedback, and the book just came out, but I think people are just like reading I don't know, blurbs or whatever, like I think there's some pre stuff on there. And so I've gotten some great feedback from from readers.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. Again, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.